Okay, we'll start with this. It would seem that former IBF bantamweight champion Sharita Metcalf is charting a course south of Bantam to Superfly, saying, "I still want a rematch with Sharnika for all the straps, but I'm on the hunt to be a two-weight world champion, two-time champion. It's headhunting season. A trip down to Superflyweight would put Jasmine Artiga in her crosshairs,
WBA champion
Mizuki Hiruta, the WBO champion, Irma Garcia, the reigning IBF champion, who I think is about to lose her title to Emma Doolin,
and East LA's Adelaida Ruiz, newly crowned WBC champion, who's said to be having a rematch with Ginny Fuchs in the not-so-distant future. Sharita sports a professional record of 15 wins with 5 losses and 1 draw, 2 knockouts, having been knocked out once in 21 professional bouts, best described as a pure boxer, a long and limber one, even longer if she moves down to super flyweight where the women are comparatively smaller. She's already tall for 118, she'll be taller at 115, last in action in October of last year opposite the ring Crystal Rosado, who she beat by way of a unanimous decision, a dubious one that most people didn't agree with, in what was her second fight in the previous year. The first was the loss to Sharnika,
the one that costed her the blue belt.
She said that she wants a rematch with Sharnika. The problem is that Sharnika's got a full plate. She's got Dina Thorsland hot on her trail and a mandatory challenger in Miyo Yoshida, who is also due a world title opportunity, pushing Sharita to the bottom of the queue. Though even if she could get a second fight with Sharnika Johnson in a timely fashion, I don't think it would go any differently. I picked Sharnika to beat her before. I would go with Sharnika to beat her again, though how would a fight with Sharita and the champions at 115 go? Does she stand a better chance down there of becoming a world champion?
Hard to say, because the reigning WBA and WBC champions would go about fighting Sharita the same way that Sharnika did. Whether you're talking about Jasmine Artiga or Adelaida Ruiz, they would both put pressure on Sharita Metcalf, try to mow her down. Because they're a bit smaller and perhaps not as fast on their feet as Sharnika Johnson, it might be a bit more difficult for them to put pressure on Sharita Metcalf. It might be a bit harder to keep up with her, but Sharita is 41 years old. She's not getting any younger, not getting any faster.
Even if she does try to play keep away, it's only going to get harder to do that on those 41-year-old legs.
I think something similar applies to the WBO champion Mizuki Hiruta of Japan, who I view as being the best in show at 115, more talented and more versatile than either Jasmine Artiga or Adelaida Ruiz. I think she could, in theory, make that adjustment to put the pressure on Sharita Metcalf because she's very athletic, fast on her feet, with power.
The weakest link is Irma Garcia. That's the most beatable champion at super flyweight. She's in the same age bracket as Sharita. The issue there is she's about to fight Emma Doolin, and I believe that Emma Doolin is going to beat her. Emma Doolin is best described as a pure boxer, a long and limber one, like Sharita.
Proximity may be a determining factor in which one of these champions Sharita gets access to, as only one of them fights under the MVP banner the same as her, and that's Jasmine Artiga, who to my knowledge is not otherwise preoccupied. She does have a mandatory challenger in the queue in Natalie Delgado, but the WBA ain't ordered that fight. So in theory, she is available to voluntarily defend her title against Sharita. So that might be the fight we end up seeing, just based on proximity, now that Sharita has made it her mission to move from 118 down to 115.
However, to the ongoing story, former unified welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. is not done yet, as Tszyu and Charlo enter shark-infested waters.
Errol Spence may yet have unfinished business in boxing, as fresh speculation over his future begins to gather momentum. Manager Adrian Clark recently shared footage of the former unified welterweight champion training alongside ex-world title holder Brian Gore-Tex, offering another rare glimpse of the truth back at work, though we've been seeing glimpses like this in the subsequent 3 years that followed his lopsided loss to Terence Crawford, so it's hard to say we're any closer now to an Errol Spence Jr. comeback than we were 2 or 3 years ago.
Adrian Clark's footage shows Spence and Norman Jr. running side by side during a road work session, with the manager struggling to keep pace behind them, a moment that immediately reignited talk of a possible return. It's highly possible both fighters could feature on the same show in 2026 if Spence decides to step back into the ring. Sightings of Spence training have been few and far between over the last few years, which is why each appearance quickly reignites the same question across the sport. Will fans see him back in the ring one more time? After 3 long years away from competitive action, the Texans' future has remained one of boxing's lingering unknowns. Spence has not fought since losing to Terrence Crawford in their undisputed showdown in 2023. His career was dramatically disrupted by the horrific car crash he was fortunate to survive, an incident that halted his momentum just as he had established himself among the sport's elite. Since then, updates on the former champion have been sporadic following cataract surgery, leaving many to wonder whether his career had quietly reached its natural conclusion. Clark's footage has now stirred fresh speculation that Spence could yet make a comeback.
Recent reports have linked Spence to a potential clash with Tszyu, while memories of a public call-out between Spence and Jermell Charlo last year continue to circulate among fans. Both names sit prominently in the super welterweight landscape and would represent immediate high-profile options should Spence decide the time is right.
I think the Tszyu fight is a lot more realistic than the Charlo fight because Charlo, like Spence, is inactive, and he has been the last few years following his lopsided loss to Canelo Alvarez, whereas Timmy's been active, he's rebounded off the loss, he's got a fight coming up.
And he, unlike Jermell Charlo, actually has some money behind him, which in prize fighting matters a great deal. Tszyu remains firmly in the title picture at junior middle, while a long-discussed matchup with Charlo has always carried intrigue, given their shared standing in the sport, for a fighter who once unified the welterweight division, stepping back into the shark-infested waters at junior middle against names like Tszyu or Charlo would answer the ongoing questions surrounding his career. If Spence does choose to return, he will not be easing back into the sport, as he would be stepping straight back into the deepest depths. And that is exactly where Errol Spence Jr. has always done his best work. If you're going to court the idea of an Errol Spence Jr. comeback, it's not just Tszyu, and it's not just Jermell Charlo that he could end up fighting.
Errol Spence Jr. is not the only remnant of the previous welterweight era still lingering in the sport. There is also Keith Thurman, set to return to action this weekend. He had a few choice words for Errol.
Some people be stuck in the past, bro. Like, drop that stuff, EJ. Like, forget about it, EJ. You know what I'm saying? What do you want to do now, EJ? How you want to represent yourself now? What you gonna do to Keith Thurman now, bro? You know what I'm saying? Like, stop playing, bro. Who did he fight? Who did he fight in his arena? And Ugas?
Yeah.
Bro, stop playing, bro. You wasn't supposed to fight Ugas. Who were you supposed to fight? Manny Pacquiao. You wasn't supposed to fight Manny Pacquiao. Who was you supposed to fight? Keith Thurman, bro. Keith Thurman was supposed to beat Manny Pacquiao. Then the biggest fight of your career would have been Keith Thurman, bro. Stop playing. Before the big fight, which ended up being Bud Crawford, right? Because, like they say, it was, we were the big three, baby. It was Thurman, Spence, and Bud, bro. We was the big three. So, yeah, man, for the fans, for the people, for the OGs, if he want to run it any day of the week, bro, we can do it. Inside, outside, we can do it, man. You know, it is what it is, man. That's a fight that I've been waiting for.
Keith Thurman tells Errol Spence Jr. to stop being hung up on the past, only to immediately take a stroll down memory lane, bringing up the past. Why didn't you two guys fight before?
Me refresh your memory. It's because you didn't want to. Following Keith Thurman's big win over Danny Garcia, how many times was he asked about unifying titles with Errol Spence Jr., guy on the same side of the street as him? The whole elbow injury.
That was bullshit.
I don't believe the severity of that injury was enough to keep Keith Thurman sidelined for 2 consecutive years. Not when you consider the extent of the damage Errol suffered after that horrific car accident, and how a year later, he was back in the ring.
A fucking year.
Thus, Keith Thurman came down with the worst case of tennis elbow in recorded history. I'm of the opinion he was waiting out the division, using an injury as an excuse and hoping that Errol would move on, or that somebody would come along and somebody would beat him.
At that time, there were not many places for Keith Thurman to hide. Not from his own PBC stablemate, so he chose to sit out. chose to ride the bench instead.
It was very easy at that time to disregard fights with other fighters that were with other promotions, but not Errol because he was right there with you.
You could use side of the street politics to avoid fighting Bud Crawford, but not Errol.
So rather than fight him, you chose to hide out, let the division move on, and the sport, which it did, without Keith Thurman.
And I think he did the same thing to Jaron Ennis, because after the Mario Barrios fight, he took another hiatus, likely for fear that he'd be pressured to fight Boots, who was on Showtime at that time, so that if a risk-averse fighter like him has all of a sudden come around to the idea of fighting Errol Spence Jr., it's only because Errol hasn't fought in 3 years and he's still coming off a loss.
It's only because the fight is not as dangerous now as it once was. It's only because Keith Thurman is a brazen opportunist and enough people in the media don't call him out on it. Calling out a quasi-retired fighter who you already avoided. Shameless. But if Keith Thurman does pull a miracle off this weekend and he wins, that does keep the Errol Spence Jr. fight alive. That is the American equivalent of Khan versus Brook.
Those two Brits who circled each other for years, all the bad blood between them, eventually they fought when they were both past their best, and the same could happen with Keith and Errol.
Because they are both past their best, though if Keithy can pull off a miracle this weekend, that would not only be the best win he's recorded in recent memory, it might be the best win of his career, enough to give it a shot in the arm that brings him back into the forefront of the conversation, making him somebody to beat at 154. I don't think for a second he's interested in unifying titles with Xander or fighting Josh Kelly. He wants to fight a past prime Errol Spence Jr.
It's the only reason he wants to fight him.
Now, when this first became a hot button topic, I favored Errol Spence Jr. to win because of his volume, because of his aggression, because of his body attack, and because Keith Thurman is weak to the body.
Everybody knows that.
Errol's a slightly bigger guy than Keith Thurman, able to cover a lot of ground. I figured he'd be able to keep up with and keep the pressure on Keith Thurman, who's going to move lateral, try to set traps, walk him into a counter.
I figured Errol's jab, when closing the distance, might make the difference, Errol being a southpaw.
Pumping out that lead right hand to, in effect, keep Keith Thurman's guns holstered at least long enough for Errol to get in close and rip some shots to the body. I used to think that Errol would overwhelm him with volume and aggression, but in 2026, it's a different situation.
Keith Thurman has finally found a fighter less active than he is. Errol.
Though before it becomes about Keith for Errol Spence Jr., it may yet become about Tim Tszyu, who says he's going to let his fists do the talking. The former champion is ready to rumble. Tim Tszyu is vowing to bring out the big dog if that's what it takes to save his boxing career in a make-or-break battle with the unbeaten Albanian Dennis Nurja. After 3 world title defeats in the last 5 fights, Tszyu knows he will be walking a tightrope at Wollongong's Wynn Stadium on Easter Sunday, beat Nurja and set up a mega money super fight with the American superstar Errol Spence Jr. or lose and face the grim prospect that his once distinguished international career is over. There's a lot on the line. Fuck. It's a big gamble, the former junior middleweight world champion said on Wednesday, but I think, as us boxers and anyone that wants to achieve something, they've got to put it all on the line and gamble. It's not a gamble when you know what you possess, what you bring out, so I'll let my fists do the talking. Tszyu only arrived back home in Sydney on Tuesday following an intense 8-week training camp in Miami with his new coach, Pedro Diaz. This will be his second fight with Pedro.
So we'll see what tactical and technical improvements Timmy can make in what is his second fight with a new trainer. The 31-year-old admits he lost his way after spending his whole life getting too comfortable with his former entourage led by his uncle and trainer, Igor Golubev.
This camp has been completely different because I've actually got to learn different things and different methods, game plans and technical stuff, tactical stuff, Tszyu said. Looking back on my last sparring back in the days, bro, I used to be sometimes a sitting duck. I see it, and I've seen the lessons that I've learned from it, and it's about improving and developing a new style. So this is why I took the fight, because I believe in my skills, I know what I'm capable of, and the world's in my hands, and so I'm going to take it with both hands.
Best described as a pressure fighter, at least in previous fights. I don't know what he's being molded into now, but Timmy's strength has always been his come-forward aggression and his power, his volume of punches, overwhelming his opponents, whereas Pedro Diaz,
he's a cerebral kind of trainer that makes for a cerebral kind of fighter, an X's and O's guy. After going from 23 from 23 in his first professional fights, the son of a gun candidly admits he also became too brazen in the ring before losing his WBO title to Sebastian Fundora, then losing a rematch to the towering American, as well as a world title stoush with Russian hitman Bakram Murtazaliev. I'm seeing boxing from a different perspective, Tszyu said. I remember growing up as a young kid, we always used to be taught sort of the Soviet Union style, front hand up, being able to use the distance and use your legs and stuff like that. I sort of neglected it, and I came towards this professional Western boxing where it's just seek and destroy, and unfortunately, on that path, you get caught. And I got caught, and I'm just making small, minor adjustments. The Sydney Slayer is refusing to reveal what style he will bring against the brawling Nurja, other than a bit of everything. The boxing fundamentals, it's quite simple, he said. It's working the front hand, not trying to get hit, not trying to go for the scrap all the time, but also having that dog in you if you need it. I've showed, as they say, cojones all the time, and when it's rough and dirty, I know when to bring it out. So I know I've got that up my sleeve at all times. Just, do I need to expose it in round one, straight away? No, I don't. It's all about timing. When to expose the cojones. When to get dirty. Deep and dirty. I'm still the same old Tszyu, of course. But I feel like you need to keep learning.
You seldom ever see a pressure fighter like Tszyu give their style a complete overhaul. It so rarely happens, but it does happen. It happened with Zurdo Ramirez following his loss to Dmitry Bivol and his move up to the cruiserweight division. Zurdo used to be a pressure guy through and through, but upon moving up to cruiser, he became more of a boxer and more of a mover.
Accenting that it's not impossible for a pressure guy to become more of a boxer. It can be done, and that's what Tszyu is trying to do. Coming off a win over that Velasquez kid, I'm not worried about Dennis Nurja. I'm not worried about the Dennis Nurja fight. I believe that Timmy's gonna win it. It's just a question of whether it's by decision or by way of knockout.
It's the Spence fight you really gotta think on. Maybe Errol Spence Jr. is a bit more experienced and competed at a higher level than Timmy has so far.
Though being out of the ring 3 consecutive years isn't gonna help him at all against Tszyu.
If they do end up fighting and Errol's got it in his head that this guy's a tune-up,
it doesn't help him that Tszyu would have had 2 tune-ups en route to the Spence fight and Spence would have had none. Make a long story short, it is not a foregone conclusion that Errol Spence Jr. wins that fight.
if they do end up fighting.